Practical Anarchy, Guide to Self-Determination, Dickie Dredd. Section 42, Education as Commodity. Education should be a birthright, free and universal, a foundation for human flourishing. Instead, under capitalism, it has been commodified, reduced to a product to be purchased, a credential to be leveraged, or a debt to be repaid. Schools and universities are no longer primary spaces of learning, but factories for labour, discipline, producing workers for the market rather than free thinkers for society. From liberation to training. Anarchist traditions of education emphasised freedom and creativity. Francisco Ferrar's Escuela Moderna in Barcelona aimed to liberate children from dogma, cultivating critical inquiry rather than obedience. Later thinkers like Erwin Illich argued that compulsory schooling was itself a tool of control, shaping not only what people knew, but how they learned to submit to authority. Education, in this view, was either a path to emancipation or a cage for the mind. Capitalism chose the cage. Curricula are increasingly geared towards skills for employability, measured in metrics of productivity, league tables and value for money. Universities brand themselves like corporations, chasing international markets, patents and partnerships. Students become customers and learning becomes a return on investment. Debt and exclusion. The UK once offered free higher education, as many European countries still do. Today, tuition fees and student loans saddle graduates with tens of thousands of pounds in debt before they even enter the workplace. In the US, the situation is more extreme. Student debt has surpassed $1.7 trillion, binding generations to repayment plans that echo debt peonage. Access is stratified. Elite universities remain the preserve of the wealthy, while poorer students are funneled into underfunded institutions or pushed out altogether. The logic is clear. By commodifying education, the system ensures that the knowledge is not a common good, but a scarce resource. Debt disciplines students into compliance, deterring risk-taking or radical paths. Education thus reproduces inequality while presenting itself as the ladder out of it, a contradiction that echoes the wider themes in the previous section. Case study: UK tuition fees since 2010. In 2010, the UK government raised the cap on tuition fees for English universities to £9,000 per year, shifting much of the cost from state to student. Since then, students graduate with thousands of pounds in debt, while universities chase rankings, research income and international student fees, rather than prioritising affordable education. Maintenance grants were cut, housing costs rose, student mental health declined. The promise that education would be a ladder for social mobility has frayed. For many, it's a trap into long-term debt and precarity. Case study: the US student debt crisis. In the US, student debt has ballooned into a full-scale economic burden. As of 2023, over 45 million Americans carry student loan debt, totaling more than $1.77 trillion, as stated earlier. Many borrowers struggle to repay due to low-cost post-graduation wages, rising interest rates and lack of support. Deferment and forbearance options mask defaults rather than resolve them. Bankruptcy protections for student debt are weak or non-existent. The debt binds people into wage labour, limits career choices and burdens households that already face rising housing, healthcare and food costs. Indoctrination and obedience. Commodification also shapes what is taught. Schools and universities inculcate not only facts but habits, punctuality, obedience, competition, individualism. These traits map neatly into the requirements of wage labour and the state. Advertising, branding and corporate sponsorship creep into classrooms, reinforcing the message that there is no world outside the market. This foreshadows the argument of the next section, where persuasion becomes a form of coercion. Education alternatives. If education under capitalism is reduced to a commodity, anarchists have long experimented with alternatives that put freedom, cooperation and curiosity in the middle. The point is not simply to learn outside the state, but to practice education as liberation. One early example was the modern school movement, inspired by the Spanish anarchist Francisco Ferrer in the early 20th century. These schools rejected religious dogma and authoritarian discipline, instead encouraging critical thinking, creativity, and equality between teachers and students. Their influence spread across Europe and the Americas, leaving a legacy of non-hierarchical pedagogy. Later, radical educators developed practices like unschooling, which argues that children learn best when they follow their own interests rather than a fixed curriculum. While not always explicitly anarchist, unschooling overlaps with anarchist values of autonomy and trust in self-organisation. It also challenges the division between work and play, seeing all life as a field of learning. In more recent years, free schools and grassroots learning spaces have carried the same spirit, from community-run libraries and social centre workshops to alternative colleges and skills-sharing festivals. These spaces embody mutual aid. They thrive on voluntary participation, horizontal organisation, and an understanding that knowledge should be a commons, not a commodity, to be bought. Taken together, these experiments show that education can be reimagined. Instead of preparing children to be obedient workers or consumers, anarchist approaches aim to cultivate free people capable of questioning authority and building cooperative futures. Why anarchism demands free education. For anarchists, the stakes are obvious. A society built on mutual aid and freedom requires open, cooperative learning, not commodified training. Education should be collective, exploratory, and accessible to all without fees or debt. It should cultivate autonomy, creativity, and critical thought, not prepare people for obedience to employers or the state. If capitalism has turned education into another commodity, anarchism demands its restoration as a commons. The fight for free education is not a narrow reform, but part of the wider struggle against commodification itself. Just as food banks reveal the failure of wage systems and healthcare markets expose the cruelty of profit-driven medicine, tuition fees and student debt expose how knowledge has been captured for profit. Only by reclaiming education as a shared right can we begin to unlearn obedience and prepare the ground for a freer world. This is a theme that will carry forward when we turn to religion in Chapter 6, for schools and churches alike have long been partners in shaping compliant subjects.